Since Wayne said we had 2 minutes, I'm going to take that time and get started because I have a lot I want to cover. Maybe this will help if I move this. Thank you so much for your attention. There's a few slides that I'd love to go back and show you from the New Testament era, just with regards to the site of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. A lot of very good archaeological evidence with regards to crucifixion, burial rites during the first century, and also the site of Golgotha. Those are fascinating areas. Also, the burial box of James and Caiaphas. If we have a chance, maybe I can go back and we'll do that. But I'm going to jump right into the Old Testament. There is a lot of stuff that you're going to see. And of course, when Time or U.S. News or World Report or any magazine wants to sell a lot of copies, they're going to put a very controversial topic like this on the cover of the magazine. They know they're going to get lots of people to buy this. Is the Bible fact or fiction? And of course, when you look at the one thing I want to remind you, and I want to remind our young people here, is that when it comes to the stories of the Old Testament, I'm going to just use the ones that are predominantly chosen to highlight the fiction part, the myth part. Of course, is creation, the seventh-day creation. The character of Jonah, who was swallowed by was it by a whale? Does the Bible say a whale? No, it doesn't say a whale. It says a large fish. Of course, again, the parting of the Red Sea, and other like events. But I want to remind you something. If the Son of God, if you're a Christian and you believe the words of Jesus, then Jesus, of course, in the New Testament mentions not only the character of Jonah, mentions the character of Noah, mentions these individuals as historical characters, and relates to them and conveys them in a historical light. If the Son of God can't get his history right, there's a problem. Jesus knew full well these were historical characters. And folks, you just can't have it both ways. You can't accept Jesus as the Son of God who's referring to mythological characters like Adam. Did you know Jesus refers to Adam as a historical character? You can't have it both ways. These individuals, these people that are referred to in the Old Testament that Jesus refers to as historical characters were real people. So we're in an era where we obviously are facing different worldviews. Humanistic worldviews, evolutionary worldviews, atheism, naturalism, materialism. These are the predominant viewpoints and thought processes in our society today. And unfortunately, those like us who uphold the Word of God as the reliable, truthful Word of God inspired by Him, for us who hold those people, those places as real historical events, who take the Bible for what it says, we are being marginalized in this category of being fundamentalist, intolerant, as people who are unintelligent, and young people especially are being convinced that if they believe these things, they're not intelligent. And just don't buy that. Don't buy that. Because again, it's been prophesied that this time would come. Through the Holy Spirit, Paul wrote to Timothy in 2 Timothy 4:3, "For the time will come when men will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. They will turn their ears away from the truth, turn aside to what? Myths." Let me tell you this. Let me tell you what a real myth is. Folks, the book of Genesis, the idea that God created the universe in 7 days. Folks, people want to say that's a myth. The fact that God chose a man to build a boat, save 8 souls, referred to in 2 Peter referred to him as a historical character. Folks, that's not so much myth to me. What's myth is the idea that you and me, with our ability to sit here today and consciously think, to love, to have the ability to sit here and contemplate our existence, that you and I, with our ability to physiologically be able to think and see and listen and hear, that you and I as individuals with a spirit, with a conscience, are the result of an accident. What's myth is the fact that matter or life is the result of non-life. That's a myth. And that's craziness. That's illogical. It's irrational. But who's made to feel irrational and illogical? It's us. Folks, the idea of evolution flies in the face of every law of thermodynamics that's ever been written. And yet we're the ones that are made to feel stupid. Don't forget this verse, because we're told that there will be those that want to, the teacher's going to say what their itching ears want to hear, but turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to myths. Historicity of the Bible. Bible scholars and teachers would do well to give the biblical text its full day in court before acquiescing to the interpretations of archaeologists or scholars who use what? What's their biggest argument? What's their tool? It's the argument of silence. The complete lack of material evidence for the Israel inhabitation of Canaan, for example. To make such claims that the Israelites were unable to have occupied the Promised Land before 13th century BC, especially since these conclusions fan the flames of non-inerrants, liberal scholars determined to undermine the history of the Bible. Folks, it is the goal of scholars of the humanistic society, and especially in the universities, to undermine the historicity of the Bible. What happens when your faith in the Bible is undermined? You drop down to their level. That's exactly what they want. So, I want to start real quickly with a fascinating new study that's going on. I want to read just real quickly, just to give you a glimpse of what I'm talking about with regards to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, found in Genesis, in the book of Genesis. The Sodom and Gomorrah story, this is, by the way, this is from a PhD, Miller and Hayes, in a book called The History of Ancient Israel and Judah. The Sodom and Gomorrah story, they say, reflects yet another motif pattern known from extra-biblical literature, that of divine beings who visit a city to test the hospitality of the people and eventually destroy the inhospitable city. And by the way, the Bible doesn't in any way, shape, or form say that they were inhospitable. It says that they were homosexual. One can compare this regard to Greek myth by Bacchus and Philemon. The presence of such traditional motifs in the biblical narratives raises the possibility that at least some of these narratives are purely products of the storyteller's art, which of course raises serious questions about their usefulness for historical. Doesn't that sound so intelligent? Doesn't that just have intelligence dripping off of it? You would think that this person who would use these big words to be such a smart guy, right? Well, basically what they're telling you and what they want you to think is that, you know what, you can hold the Bible, but Bible, it's fine. Just so you know that half of what they're saying is myth. Well, let me just say this. There's been, for the past 10 years, archaeological research being done on this idea of, on the location of Sodom and Gomorrah. And I will tell you, there is some debate on this. So I'm certainly not up here to say that this is definitively this site or this site. But I will tell you that since the last time I gave this lecture, there has been a plethora of new information with regards to the site of Sodom and Gomorrah. Just to remind you, in Genesis chapter 19, Lot says, "But I can't flee to the mountains. The disaster will overtake me and I'll die." I want to go back. And then, of course, it's reference to the fact that after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, he flees to the city of Zoar. So we have this map. This is called the Madaba map. It was found, and it was created in the 6th century. It was found. And what's unique about this particular map that was found in the sanctuary of St. Lot, basically in Jordan, is they found a reference to the location of Zoar. What's important about Zoar? Well, it's a biblical city that was referred to in the book of Genesis. Well, of course, many people thought the biblical city of Zoar was a mythological site, but of course it's referenced here. And so when you ask yourself, where is Sodom? Where would you, if you were an archaeologist, where would you dig? Let's look at the biblical account. Genesis chapter 13, verses 1 through 12 says this. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev, and Lot went with him. From the Negev he went from the place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai. So that's where Lot and Abraham are. Okay, so Bethel and Ai. I'll show you where that's at in just a minute. Lot looked up and saw the whole plain like the Jordan was well watered, like the gardens of Yahweh. So he's not looking at a desert. He's looking at a place pretty well watered. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan, set out towards the east. Abraham lived in the land of Canaan, where Lot lived among the cities of the plain, pitched his tents near Sodom. Now I want to highlight a couple things. Number one, this is the Dead Sea, and south of the Dead Sea is this area where many people believe the city of Zoar is. And you can see it down below. This is south of the Dead Sea. And on the eastern side of the Dead Sea is where Jordan is. So you see this site, and these are two places that have been excavated going back into the 70s. Bab ed Dirah, up at the top left, is the site where they believe is the city of Sodom. Numeria is the city of Gomorrah. And so these are places back in the 70s, and again, there are many conservative biblical scholars that believe that these were the sites. And now I'll show you the excavations. This is Bab ed Dirah. These are excavations that took place. A lot of the site, a lot of the findings are from the Middle Bronze area, which is consistent with Abraham's period. But again, you can see these excavations being done. You can see a lot of evidence of fire and destruction, which is what you would expect in Sodom and Gomorrah. If you're excavating Sodom and Gomorrah, you expect to see a lot of burnt things, right? That city got burnt. So you see all these things here. But what I want to highlight real quickly is the fact that there has been new excavations that I think are fascinating that I want to share with you. Genesis chapter 19, verse 23, it says, "By the time Lot reached Zoar, the sun had risen over the land. The Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah." Keep that in mind. We're going to come back to that. "The Lord out of the heavens, thus he overthrew the cities and the entire plain." Now, what fell at that time must have caused such massive destruction. Of course, it's going to cover multiple cities. It's going to cover Sodom and Gomorrah. And these are sites that weren't right on top of each other. They were close, but petroleum and sulfur are quite prevalent south and around the Dead Sea. So again, all those things are consistent. So when you look at some of the topsoil and some of the other areas, you find, again, not infrequently, there was mud bricks with ash, again, resulting from, again, a severe conflagration, which is a burn. Now, look at the text in Genesis 13 we just read. It keeps mentioning Lot looked up and saw the whole plain of the Jordan. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of Jordan. You can see that there. What does that word plain in the Hebrew mean? That word plain is the Hebrew word kikar. And that Hebrew word kikar means a disc or circular area. It was actually a term that used to describe a loaf, a rounded loaf. And so it's referring to this disc. It's referring to an area well watered right at this location north of the Dead Sea. And again, you can see here where Bethel and Ai are. If Abraham and Lot are at Bethel and Ai, and they're looking east, where is east? Well, east isn't south of the Dead Sea. So a group of conservative, believe it or not, a group of Bible-believing conservative archaeologists have been digging in Gakar, and this is in Jordan, and they have found, they found a lot of really fascinating evidence with regards to what's going on there. So here's a photo showing the tell there. And at this area, it's an extremely well-watered airscape in the region. And again, it's right across the Jordan River from Jericho. We're going to talk about Jericho in just a minute. So looking east, that's north of the Dead Sea. And so this is what's called Tel Hammam. This is brand new stuff. This was not in last year's talk. This is where they're digging, and they have dug here for the last 10 years. And what they have found is pretty amazing. So again, they're finding pottery. How do you know where you're at from a date standpoint? They look at the pottery. They know what type of pottery existed during particular times. They know that the right time is located. They found this period of time when Abraham and Lot would have lived. There are some dating challenges with regards to that I'm not going to get into. But what they found, what's really interesting is that this is Middle Bronze, which is during the time of Abraham. And then immediately right above that layer is Iron Age 2. So what's that mean? Well, that means that they went from Middle Bronze Age, and there was a massive destruction, massive burning everywhere at that level. Everything was burned. In fact, I'm going to show you some of the things that were burned. But then the entire area was uninhabited for 700 years. So what's the time frame between Middle Bronze and Iron Age? Almost 700 years. That's how long I would have thought they would take to even consider rebuilding at this site or doing anything at this site after that kind of destruction. This is what they found. This city is huge. And of course, the city of Sodom had to be big because the Bible says it was the largest city in the plain. So look at how large this city is. It was fortified with walls, with mud brick. Again, what they would have is they'd have a revetment and a mud brick above, just like in Jericho, which we're going to look at. And again, you can see the chronological occupation, see them digging there. I don't have much time to go through this in detail, but I want to show you this. What they found here is the mud bricks have been so significantly burned that in some cases it almost melted the pottery. So this is melted pottery here on the left-hand side. So they found this at the Tell. And on the right side are trinitite pieces. Where did this come from? Why did they compare? This was sent to Arizona to compare. This was literally sent from Israel, or from Jordan, where they're excavated, and it was studied. And basically, this stuff on the right was the stuff that was produced when they dropped a nuclear bomb called the Trinity nuclear bomb in 1945. This is what was produced when they dropped a nuclear bomb. So the pottery that was melted to such a high degree had to reach temperatures that equivalent to that of a nuclear bomb. Pretty interesting. This is what they found. This is highly unusual to find something like this in a Tell there. Be reminded, Genesis 19, he looked down toward Sodom, toward all the land of the plain. He saw dense smoke rising from the land like smoke from a furnace. And that's what you would expect to find, and that's what they found here. This is desert glass. This is basically sand that has been burned to such a high temperature that it's formed glass. This is also fascinating. This is, again, from the same Tell. Human bones scattered. In other words, this was a person that was literally destroyed, almost like a grenade would have caused. Multiple fragmentation of the bones, the hyperflex toes. Remember I told you I'd show you a foot. That's one of them. Middle Bronze Age, domestic plaza. Again, you can see here that this bones were burned immediately. This person was in pretty bad shape pretty quick. And again, I'm just showing you quickly some of the images that have been produced with regards to what the walls would have looked like. This is a huge fortified city. And again, I think it's a fascinating picture. What's fascinating about this is the fact that the guy who's leading this particular excavation has been doing this for 10 years. He is being funded by the Jordanians. The Jordanians are funding him. Of course, he gets a lot of private donations. But the reason why they're able to do this is because Israelis, of course, laugh him off the planet. But most Israeli archaeologists would say that the city of Sodom and Gomorrah is purely mythological. Most Israelis believe that. In fact, the biggest enemies of the inerrancy of Scripture, of all people, are Jewish archaeologists. Unbelievable. However, what's interesting here is that the reason why he was given another 10-year funding for digging here is because to the Islam people, the Quran, you know how many times it refers to the city of Sodom and Gomorrah? Almost 10 times. To Muslims, this is a very important site. It's a very important site to the Quran. So they're all about wanting to excavate there. That's how he's being able to be supported by the government there. It's fascinating. Israelis would have never given him a dime to dig there. I want to just highlight one quick thing, and it was brought up to me by a friend here, and I think it's very important. There is very commonly especially in multimedia, especially with online sites, what's called pseudo-archaeology. That is archaeological finds that seem so spectacular that we as Christians, we just want to just jump all over those things. When you see something pop up on that, has Noah's Ark been found? Or our chariot wheels in the Dead Sea. When you see things like that, we're drawn to them. But I want to just give you, I want to caution you in that a lot of those things are unsubstantiated, and a lot of them know they're going to get a lot of press and a lot of interest. And I'm not going to read this slide, but I want to give you an example, and it's an unfortunate one because I remember as a young person, there was I don't know if you referred to him as a scholar, but there was a gentleman by the name of Ron Wyatt. And many of you have maybe read him online or gone to his website or read some of his books. But Ron Wyatt claimed to have found a lot of stuff that was not considered legitimate. Just be careful, because a lot of quote-unquote archaeology is what's called pseudo-archaeology. In other words, it's really unsubstantiated. So, and again, some people have said they found splinters of the cross of Jesus, Shroud of Turin, wheels, chariot wheels. the books of law written on Moses on animal skins. Again, all these things I've sampled here. Some people claim they found Goliath's sword. Just be very careful and cautious and read critically as you go through here. I want to highlight one interesting thing. This is new too. This was not in last year's presentation. You know who Robert Ballard is? If you've ever watched the movie or been familiar with the Titanic, this is a brilliant PhD, a brilliant scholar and archaeologist that actually discovered the Titanic. This is the guy who actually found the Titanic. It's been, I guess, almost a decade ago or more. But this guy basically is an underwater archaeologist famed for discovering the Titanic in 1980. Claims to have found evidence of the biblical flood. Now, this is not some crazy loony guy. This is a guy who is basically diving down. He uses robotic equipment, and this was just published in several media outlets. But this is what he says. Robert Ballard says, claims to have found evidence of a biblical flood that Noah fled, surfing the waters for 40 days and 40 nights, according to Genesis. He says the Black Sea, he's been looking in the Black Sea, once merely a freshwater lake, he thought, until an enormous wall of water from the Mediterranean, 200 times more powerful than Niagara, swept in and everything else away, including, he says, we went there to look for the flood. He says, not just a slow-moving, advancing rise of sea level, but a really big flood that then stayed. The land that went under stayed under. What's interesting is that Robert Ballard believes that there was a universal flood, and he's doing work in the Black Sea. More I could read on that, but it's a fascinating read. This is a very interesting item here. If any of you have heard, and this is, I show this picture because this is basically a piece of stone that was found in the city of Nineveh back in the turn of the century. This is a fragment that's called the Gilgamesh epic. This is basically a stone fragment that tells the story of a flood that took place, very, very similar to that of the Bible. How many of you have heard that the Noahic story is the result of basically previous myth that was told prior, including things like this Gilgamesh epic? So which came first? These stories that are very highly mythological, that have multiple gods fighting, and you see the story of a flood. Well, it's common to make legends out of historical events, and that's what's happened here. The Bible teaches that mankind was originally monotheistic too. And that's something that you'll find in scholarship. Scholarship believes that polytheism came first before the idea of monotheism, and that's just pure absurd. Monotheism came first. Archaeological evidence suggests the same. But these gods in the Gilgamesh epic that was found in this tablet has made a lot of people believe that the story in Genesis is the result that was borrowed from these stories like this. I want to show you something. There's a Dr. Richard Andre that's collected 46 flood legends from North and South America, 20 from Asia, 5 from Europe, 7 from Africa, 10 from the South Sea Islands of Australia. And this is basically just a graph of the similarities of these stories. Folks, let me just tell you this. Myth and legend comes from an event that took place, a true event that took place, not the reverse. Look at all of these stories that took place. And again, you see man and transgression, man destruction, favored family, ark provided, destruction of water, humans saved, animals saved, universal destruction. Look at this idea of humans being destruction by water. Almost all the accounts discuss a destruction by water. And what's even more fascinating is this idea that birds were sent out in several stories. Survivors worship, divine favor of the saved. All of these similarities in the Noahic flood story in Genesis. It's fascinating. And I want to show this. This is really one of the most fascinating things. When you look at the Chinese pictogram characters, and the Chinese language was developed literally centuries and centuries ago, but when you look at the Chinese word for boat or ship, what does that word consist of? Let's see if I can take this off. That word consists of these figures. This figure basically meaning vessel. This figure meaning eight. And this figure meaning mouths. Those three figures come together to form the word boat. I think that's by accident. It's a fascinating picture of the fact that the Noahic story, the story of mankind being destroyed by God, was an event that took place. And it was an event that was passed on through generations and generations and generations. And as those stories were told, of course, as polytheism began to grow, those stories took on a life of their own and became some of these stories that have been found archaeologically, like the Gilgamesh epic. The Ebla tablets, one of the earliest tablets, earliest forms of writing that's been found. And when these were found, believe it or not, for a long time, scholarship thought that Moses could have never written the Ten Commandments because writing wasn't even predominant during that period of time. These were discovered in northern Syria, excavations made at Tel Mardik. These tablets, there's thousands of them, there's hundreds of them. Names 5,000 cities are mentioned in these tablets. Includes many biblical cities such as Salem, Gaza, Lachish. This city was destroyed in 2250 by BC by Sargon, but these tablets have a tremendous archaeological value because early critics did not think writing was prevalent during the time of Moses. These tablets were written during the time of Moses. Recent digs in these areas have even found that writing skills were very advanced. But again, just goes to show you, scholarship's going to do everything it can to undermine the fact that God could have had Moses write these things down. And of course, that flew in the face of these finds here. Now, this is basically one of the Tel Armana letters found in Egypt. This was around the time, the 1400 BC was around the time of the conquest. So if you can, in your mind, picture the Exodus, the children of Israel in Egypt, leaving Egypt around 1446 BC. And I'm going to hopefully be able to show you why we came up with that date. But this is a letter that came from Canaan to the emperors in Egypt at that time, and they were complaining about these peoples called the Hebrew. Now, there's a lot of debate about this term reference to Hebrew. You can see it here, the Hebrew, and this is what the letter says. The Hebrew plunders all lands of the king. If archers are here this year, the lands of the king, the Lord will remain. But if the archers are not here, the lands of the king, my Lord, are lost. It's referencing this marauding group of people that have just occupied Canaan. And there's lots of scholarship that believes that this is a reference to the Jews during the conquest. They caused havoc. Now keep in mind that during the time of the conquest, Egypt was still the main power of the land. And so when Joshua leads the children of Israel over the Jordan River, and of course comes first to of course Jericho, and then it's going to go to Ai, and later to Hazor. All word of this you would expect got sent back to Egypt, and this is an example of that having taken place. There was this group that of course, when you read the Bible, you read about this group of people called Hittites. Now, you and I know those people to be, of course, a biblical people, but for a long period of time, the Hittite people were thought to be, again, a mythological or made-up group of people until 1906, when they found, of course, the Hittite nation. They found its capital city. Of course, the Hittites, the sons of Ham, were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. Canaan was the father of Sidon, his firstborn, and of the Hittites. Genesis chapter 10. So when you look at these people, I don't have much time to go over this, but I'm going to skip over this. Hittite Empire was discovered. It was found to be a major empire, and of course, it was discovered by this gentleman who not only found the existence of this complete nation, but did a lot of excavation and found all of these findings, including the capital city, Hattusa. And again, these are pictures of the finds there. So 1875 BC, Abraham is in Egypt. He communicated them. Josephus actually tells us that he communicated to them arithmetic and delivered to them the science of astronomy. Before Abraham came into Egypt, they were unacquainted with those parts of learning, for that science had come through the Chaldeans into Egypt. What's interesting about this is that we learn again from Genesis chapter 10, sons of Ham, Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. What's important about that? Egypt is called Mesraim by the Hebrews. In fact, you see that. Of course, it was established, Egypt was established, its entire people, going way back, were established by one of the sons of Ham. Whose son was that? Mizraim, the son of Ham. So Mizraim was that name that was named, of course, after its founder, the son of Ham, became a name that was attached to the Egyptian people for a long period of time. For after the flood, Ham, son of Noah, begat, of course, Mesraim, who was the first to set out and establish himself in Egypt. So when you go to Egypt today, and I've been there, you know what Egypt is referred to among Egyptians? Misri. That's the name that Egypt still holds today. Misri. I'm probably mispronouncing it. I'm not saying it in the way that they say it, but you can see the name right there in front of the insurance sign. So this name is still used today, and it's a direct correlative to the son of Ham. That's not by coincidence. So, what about the Exodus? This is one of my favorite topics, and I don't have time to probably give it justice. How much time do we have?
It's 8 o'clock.
Okay, all right. So I want to give you a quick overview of the book of Exodus and the archaeology of the Exodus. Why is this important? Because the Exodus right now is in the crosshairs of scholarship. Most of the scholarship world, and I'm talking about archaeologists, I'm talking about those who are editors of magazines, they do not believe that the Exodus occurred. They believe that it's pure myth. And it's being published now. There are a handful of people in scholarship who believe that there was an Exodus, but believe that it was a different type of Exodus than what the biblical account records. But most do not believe it occurred. What I want to do very quickly is give you a quick overview of why I think archaeology reveals that the Exodus took place and when it did. Number one, the chronological data, the date of the Exodus. How do we know 1446? Why do we say that? It's because when you go to 1 Kings chapter 6 verse 1 and you go to Judges chapter 11 26, it consistently supports that 1446 BC date. Consequently, we look at that date. So if 1446 is when they left, how long did it take for them to wander in the desert? 40 years. They're going to come into Israel around 1406. How do we know this again? Because it's supported by the dating that comes from the Talmud. There are at least 2 jubilees that are recorded, which allows one to back calculate the first year of that jubilee, and it just so happens to be 1406. So we know that. Number 2, archaeological evidence from 3 sites that were destroyed by the Israelites during the conquest. I'm going to spend some time on Jericho, but I want to spend a few minutes on Hazor. Hazor was a huge city. We see it not only being addressed by Joshua in 1406, but we also see it in the 13th century with the king Jabin. Remember that Deborah and Gideon are going to face Hazor some period of time afterwards. We're going to look at that as well. So, the evidence of Eglon's palace at Jericho, and if you look at Judges chapter 3, again, this is not 1406, this is in the 13th century, this is around 1320 BC. And the destruction of Hazor by Deborah and Barak, that's about 1230 BC, during the time of the Judges. That period of time also supports that 1406 or that 1446 Exodus. So what's interesting here, Joshua turned back at the time and looked at Hazor, struck its king with a sword, for Hazor was formerly the head of all those kingdoms, and they struck all the people who were in it with the edge of the sword, and what does it say? They utterly destroyed them, then burned them with fire. What does the archaeology of Hazor reveal? It reveals that there were 2 destructions. One in the 1400s and one in the 1200s. And when you go down to the late Bronze Age period, the 1446 period, you see there that there was a massive burning and destruction of the city. And that's exactly what, this is actually the site at Hazor. When you go to Israel, you can literally go up and you see it. It's a massive tell. A tell is a mound that has been formed by layers of civilization. So Hazor was destroyed twice. And one of the things that's very interesting is that the second time it was destroyed, all of the religious artifacts, the statues, their heads were all cut off. And what was interesting is that would have been something clearly by the record that Deborah and Barak would have done. So you find 2 destructions totally consistent with the New Testament period. And I wish I had more time to spend on that, but the bottom line is that it's very important. Number 3, Exodus chapter 1 verse 9 through 11 says this. So they put foremen over the Israelites to oppress them with hard labor. As a result, they built, and it says, Pithom and Ramses, storehouses for Pharaoh. Where was the palace that Pharaoh resided? Where, of course, we know that his wife was out and, of course, finds Moses. Where did that palace happen? Does that palace exist? Well, there is a lot of excavation that has happened and that's still going on in this area of what's referred to as Pi Ramesses in the eastern delta. And I'll show you some pictures. This is what's been excavated. You can see here several parts of the palace. Now, this part of the Nile River has now dried up, but it was a tributary off of the Nile River. But this tell where they've excavated is called Tel Edababa. At the time of the Exodus in 1446, the name of the city was probably something different. But the name was changed to Ramesses when the city was rebuilt by the famous Ramses II. Bottom line is they have very good evidence to suggest that they have found the palace where very likely Moses grew up that matches the biblical record perfectly. These are pictures of the royal palace. This was not a small palace. You can see this is where Jericho is. And what I'm going to do now is, I told you about, of course, Joshua comes across the Jordan River, 1406. First city they come to, Jericho. What about Jericho? What does the evidence show? Jericho basically is on the west side of the Jordan River. It's right north of the Dead Sea, and it's one of my favorite sites. When you look, we're going to look at Jericho in just a minute, but I'm going to go real quickly to the Maranatha Stela. This was a artifact that was found that demonstrates that 12 tribes of Israel were firmly established in Canaan. It's one of the first times, what many scholars believe is the first time the word Israel has ever been found in archaeology. Let me show you what it looks like. This is the stela that's been found. This stela was found, and again, it dates back to about 1230 BC, and it mentions the fact that Israel was already an occupying and formidable force in Israel. So we know that Israel had been in Canaan at least prior to this point. One of the first times Israel was mentioned. Again, this is the first mention of Israel. It says Israel is laid waste. Its seed is not. This engraved granite slab is more than 7 feet tall. And of course, it's at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, which our family had a chance to see this several years ago. One other quick thing I'm just going to show you really quick is another fragment. It's another Egyptian fragment. And what's really interesting is that some of the greatest archaeology that's being published now is stuff that was found literally almost 100 years ago that's been sitting uncatalogued, sitting in a museum, and it takes someone going in and re-looking at it and go, oh, wait a second. This is written here. And this is one of those examples where they went back and found this piece that is similar to the Maranatha Stela, but basically it's a fragment of stone that mentions 3 names of cities in Canaan. It mentions Ashkelon, which is one of the cities, of course, of the Philistines, and Canaan. And then there's this one right along the edge there. You see it's cut off. They believe actually refers to Israel. Now, why is this important? I can't get into the detail on that, but it's important because it dates the Exodus back to the time period in which the biblical account again confirms, around the 1400s. This is another fascinating piece, and I think it's one of the most fascinating. I'm going to go through it quickly. Numbers 33, probably one of the most boring chapters that you'll ever read in the Bible. Why? Because it lists cities along the Exodus route. And you're reading these long names, you're going, what on earth? This is useless reading these names. Well, here's the thing. If the Exodus really happened, why on earth would you give that much detail about your Exodus? If it was just a figment of someone's imagination, why would you list that many names? In fact, let me show you. And here's the thing. So these cities that are mentioned along the Exodus route, we have no idea where these places are. And for centuries, up until recently, everyone thought these names were just made up. They couldn't find anything. Well, of course, guess what happens? So Egypt, of course, rules Palestine during this area. And what they did is the Egyptians mapped these roads in these areas. So Egypt mapped the region very thoroughly. So I'm going to skip to the chase here. These are one of the maps that was created by Thutmose III, which is around the time of the Exodus, that mentions these cities: Idiom, Dibon, Abel, Jordan. And then of course what I'm going to show you. This is can't read that, but this is basically the names that were listed on the maps of the Egyptians, and you look how perfectly they match the names listed in the biblical account. Amalek, you see Malak right there. Elim, almost the same name. Heres. And then Dibon, almost perfectly matching the biblical account. This may not seem much, but this was a remarkable archaeological find that confirms the historicity of the Exodus. This is basically showing where Goshen was. That's where the children of Israel resided. That's where they were slaves. That's where the city that I mentioned, where they found the palace, El Debah, right there. Again, you can see what at least some scholars believe was the Exodus route. Along the course there, you can see some of the names of the cities on the map. All right. Who was the Pharaoh of the Exodus? If I asked everyone in this room, I would probably get maybe 10 different answers. I would say that no one can know for sure, but I will tell you that if you look and you use the Bible only as your chronology, as your source, and if you hold to those dates that fit the biblical chronology, it has to be this guy. And again, there's some differing opinion on this, and that's okay. It's not as important as the fact that the bottom line is that this Pharaoh was a real person. And what's interesting about this particular guy is that he reigned during the time of the Exodus, 1446. Now, what's interesting about this guy? Amenhotep I was the Pharaoh who very likely decreed in Exodus 1 verse 5 to kill the young Hebrew children. Thutmose I was the son of Amenhotep and had a daughter named Hatshepsut. And you can see that name. You're going to see that name because that name is all over archaeology right now. I'm probably mispronouncing it. But this particular woman married her half-brother Thutmose II. When Thutmose II died, she became the Pharaoh along with her younger nephew and stepson Thutmose III. Now, you thoroughly confused now? All right, that's not as important as this. The bottom line is that what they found is that this particular Pharaoh, Amenhotep II, did not have a son that lived. The person who came after him was not his son. The next Pharaoh was not his son. So not only does this character, after the Exodus, Amenhotep II is said to have performed multiple raids into Canaan. Now, why would a Pharaoh... Now, let me just mention one other very controversial questions. And that is did the Pharaoh of the Exodus die in the Red Sea? Okay? There's very good biblical evidence that supports that he did die, but there are many conservative scholars that believe he did not die. Looking at the language in the book of Psalms that refers to the Pharaoh, I happen to be of the opinion that I believe that he did not die, but again, there are some that do. But Amenhotep II, for multiple reasons, fits the Pharaoh of the Exodus very well. It's nothing to be dogmatic about, but again, that's something we can talk about another time when we have more time. This is Jericho. Jericho, of course, was a very formidable city. This was a city that was right across the Jordan. This was a city that had great walls. And some of those walls can be still seen today, but not much. But this is likely what the city looked like. It had 2 layers of walls. It had an outer ring of walls and an inner city area of walls. These walls literally went up to 30 plus feet high. In other words, when Joshua brings the children of Israel across the Jordan River, and they camp and they're looking at the city, Joshua for quite some time has no idea how they're going to take the city. God doesn't reveal how they're going to take the city until much later. But what's interesting is what does the archaeology say that took place in this city? Of course, we know the story from Joshua chapter 6. I don't have time to read it. But I want to just show you some of the early excavations. This was an excavation that was done by Garland in the early 1900s. And I want to show you, remove the microphone again, just a couple of things here. Now, this is basically, I'm sorry about that, I'm going to probably hold this from now on. This is basically excavated almost over 100 years ago. And you can see that these were houses that existed right along the wall. And I don't know if you can see it, but right here is a guy standing. So these walls were very high. So this was the revetment wall, and then up top of that was a mud brick wall. And so you see homes right alongside the city walls, which is pretty fascinating because we know of someone in the biblical account who lived right on the wall, right? Okay, so again, further pictures from John Garstang, and from the 1930s to 1936, he excavated here, and John Garstang said this, in a word, all material details and date the fall of Jericho took place as Bible in the biblical narrative. Our demonstration is limited, however, no material observations. The walls fell, shaken apparently by earthquake. The city was destroyed by fire in about 1400 BC. Everything he said and found, Garstang perfectly related to the biblical account. But that's not going to last long. These are pictures, again, of the water source, the modern reservoir, the walls that were found. But then again, in the 1960s, a woman who was a non-believer, a woman who was basically a what's called a minimalist, excavated here, and she disagreed with John Garstang's findings, basically saying that, again, agreeing almost completely the fact that it was burnt, it was destroyed, but she did not date it in the same way in concordance with Joshua coming in about 1400. So, what's the truth of the matter? Well, what we find, I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong way. Well, another scholar came along, and this is me standing right next to a part of the walls there that are burnt. You can still see conflagration signs all along the city of Jericho walls there. And again, you can see this here. I don't know if you can see how dark that is. Folks, that's old. And what's really sad is that Jericho is in the Palestinian territory, and this site is not well maintained at all. It's really quite horrible. This is the outer revetment wall that still exists. This revetment wall, again, was on top of that was another wall that probably reached upward to heights of 30 feet. So Bryant Wood comes along. Bryant Wood is a conservative archaeologist, came along and reviewed all of the findings between Garstang and Kenyon. And so in reviewing Kenyon's findings basically came down to one thing. She disagreed with the date from Garstang because she could not find a particular type of pottery that was consistent with that era. So she literally does all this excavating, basically comes up with a finding that's based upon the absence of a finding. Folks, that's just bad scholarship, erroneous findings, and here's what's really sad. Bryant Wood comes along, re-excavates, looks at all these areas, finds tons of the type of pottery, which is this pottery you see right here, finds tons of it that she couldn't find. But so he completely controverts Kenyon, goes back to Garstang's date, confirming the biblical account, and yet who does 95% of modern scholarship follow in terms of the dating of Jericho? It's Kenyon. Because she basically came up with a date that was not consistent with the biblical account. The evidence is right here. In her report, she said, I don't come up with this date because I can't find the Cypriot pottery. It's right there. He found it. But still, scholarship wants to maintain that was not found. And again, that date's inconsistent with the biblical account. But Egyptian scarabs were found. And again, these are all pictures and findings from the site. Here's what they find. In summary, both of these archaeologists, all three of them in fact, came up with the same findings insofar the harvest had just been taken. So how do they know that? Because all of the jars that they found were full of grain. So we know this. Harvest had just been taken, which is consistent with the biblical account, because what does Rahab hide the spies in? Flax that she has on the roof that she had just harvested. They also know one thing too, that if there's that much grain in all the storage jars, there was no siege. So how long was the city of Jericho sieged? That's about a week. It wasn't sieged that long, so they found all their storage jars full. The Israelites did not plunder the city. And of course, you would expect to find what? You would expect to find the city completely burned. So how did the Israelites get into the city? What's fascinating is that archaeology has shown that after the Israelites, of course, passed the city, according to the account, the walls come tumbling down. But how did they get up into the city? The biblical account says that they went up into the city one after the next. Well, what happens is, and what they found archaeologically, is that the mud brick wall that set up on top of that base wall came crumbling down and formed a ramp right up into the city. And that's how the Israelites got into the city after the walls were crumbled. So you can see here, this is the bottom revetment wall, and then there's mud bricks on top, and that's some doofus standing there too. And then you can see remains of the mud bricks literally still sitting there in Jericho. And again, you can walk right down and see this. And again, this is the destruction. You can see again how the walls came tumbling down. In other words, they literally went up the heap of bricks that came down from that top layer and went right up into the city. Again, so much more I could show. I'm going to skip over this and go right to the next point. Taking of Jerusalem. One of the most exciting archaeological things that's being discovered right now as we speak and that's being written about is the Palace of David. I don't know if any of you have read the fact that Eilat Mizar, which is a Jewish archaeologist, great pedigree, brilliant lady, has claimed to discover the Palace of David. Now, why is this significant? Because, of course, modern scholars do not believe that David or Solomon held any type of power or sway in Israel. They believe that basically they were warlords who basically were chieftains over a small village. Now, if that sounds silly, that's what most modern scholars believe about David and Solomon. That they're what called minimalists. They deconstruct the biblical account to make it not sound, they believe that basically the Bible is propaganda. They believe that much of what was written about David and Solomon was propaganda and was inflated and made up. But what does the archaeology show? That's what's fascinating. Well, one of the things that's fascinating about the old city of David is that during the time around 721, what happened in 721? The northern tribes get taken into captivity by Assyria. And then, of course, who is king down in the south when Sennacherib comes down? It's King Hezekiah. He's got two things that happen. He knows that Sennacherib, the Assyrian, is going to come down and besiege their city. He also knows he's got to expand the city because there are people that moved in from the north. So he broadens the walls of Jerusalem. He also does one thing. The biblical account tells us that he built a tunnel from the spring of Gihon, which was outside the city, to bring water into the city for the case in which they were besieged. So again, you can see the tunnel. This is basically the course of this tunnel. And of course, the biblical account describes it very much so in detail. But again, it wasn't until the 1800s that the tunnel was actually found. Now, this is a very complex diagram because underneath the old city, it's very cavernous. And so when you look at this, you can see the spring of Gihon. What they did is Hezekiah had his men start from one end, from inside the city, and the other outside. And they basically were to meet in the middle to form this. Now, keep in mind, this water to flow into the city, it had to maintain a particular grade. They had to start from one end and meet in the other. It was, an amazing archaeological feat. Now, Mickey, you recognize that guy there? So this is basically us crawling through the tunnel. You can go through the tunnel of Hezekiah, and you can walk through. And if you have not done, has anybody ever walked through the tunnel of Hezekiah? Isn't it awesome?
Awesome.
It is awesome. You've got to do it. It's pretty. If you're claustrophobic, you may not want to think about that. But it's almost 2,000 feet long, hewn out of solid rock. And of course, this is a picture that I took basically right along the way. The water can go up to about to your knees. But what's fascinating is that they found the Solomon inscription. This is an inscription that they found that basically says this. It says, when the tunnel was driven through, and this was the way in which it was cut through, while were still axes each man towards his fellow, and while there were still 3 cubits to be cut, they heard a voice of a man calling to his fellow, for there was an overlap of the rock on the right and on the left. And when the tunnel was driven through, the quarrymen hewed the rock, each man towards his fellow, axe against axe, and the water flowed from the spring toward the reservoir for 1,200 cubits. This was written in this inscription. It's interesting. This was discovered during the time before 1948. This was discovered by Palestinians. They took this inscription. You would expect this to be in the Israeli museum, but it's actually in the museum in Istanbul. Amazing archaeological find. This is in the Istanbul Museum. And again, when you go through the tunnel of Hezekiah, there's been lots that's been developed and excavated, but you can see tunnels everywhere. This is a tunnel that's called Warren Shaft. And there are many people that believe that may be the shaft that Joab climbed into the city on behalf of David to take over the city. Remember, David gave a challenge to his men. Whoever can get into the city and open the gates would be basically his right-hand man. Joab does that, goes into the city. It said he went through the plumbing system, or went through a shaft into the city, and that's exactly what he did. These are Lachish letters. These are archaeological finds that are reported during the time of Jeremiah. These were letters written by officials in Lachish. Lachish was a fortified city of Israel, outside of Israel. And these letters basically not only mention the names of multiple biblical characters, including Jehoiakim. Now Jehoiakim, of course, was the son of Jehoiakim. Jehoiakim was the son of Josiah. Jehoiakim would be, of course, his other name. Jehoiakim would be taken into. His other name was Jeconiah. He would be taken into captivity by Babylon. Hezekiah's tunnel. Again, you can see pictures here. The fortress was built around. So you have this tunnel. The last thing you want to do is people being able to enter in it. So they built this fortress around the spring. Now, what I want to show you real quickly are some pictures of the palace. Well, this is the Pool of Siloam. These pictures are just from this past year. They have not only found the Pool of Siloam. The Pool of Siloam, unfortunately, is very partially excavated because most all the pool sits on a lot that's owned by, I think, the Dominican church, some church that's based out of Italy. So I was asking our Israeli guide, why aren't you excavating this land? And they said this church won't sell it to them. So what's fascinating is that around the old city of David, there's so much to be excavated. But unfortunately, there are basically Palestinian houses everywhere. And some of them won't sell. In this particular case, this church won't sell, so they can excavate the rest of it. But what they found is not only, they found steps up from the Pool of Siloam up into the city. This is Sennacherib prison. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but Sennacherib, of course, was the Assyrian who came down from the north that besieged the Israelites. And of course, if it were not for Isaiah and Hezekiah's faithfulness, they would have been taken. But you remember that Sennacherib is, of course, a biblically named character. And of course, there are multiple inscriptions that have verified the historicity of Sennacherib. But here's the thing. After he was defeated, after his men were killed, some over 200,000 of his men, I think 150 to 200,000 of his men were killed as they surrounded the city of Jerusalem. Remember that God sent a pestilence that killed out his whole army. He goes back to his capital in Nineveh and basically creates this propaganda that basically talks about how great he was. And so he says this, he says, as to Hezekiah. So Sennacherib in this prison that was found mentions the biblical king Hezekiah. It says, as to Hezekiah the Jew, he did not submit to my yoke. I laid siege to 46 of his strong cities, wall, forts, countless small villages in the vicinity, and conquered them by means of well-stamped earth ramps. By the way, how did Assyria conquer so many cities? They used siege ramps. They created these massive siege ramps with huge wheels. They wheeled them up, and then they would use these large boulders, these pieces that would swing, and they would knock the walls down, and that's how they conquered Lachish. Himself, and this is what he says. He says, himself, I made a prisoner in Jerusalem, his royal residence, like a bird in a cage. What happened? Well, the bird in the cage did fine, but he went back to Nineveh and was killed by his own sons. So Sennacherib, again, Sennacherib and these Assyrian leaders and Egyptian leaders, here's the interesting thing, and I want to point this out. You won't ever find these people putting in stone stelas, ostracon. You won't see them recording defeats. You're going to only see propaganda. You're going to see them recording victories. So how much would you expect to find in Egyptian hieroglyphs or Egyptian inscriptions about the humiliating 10 plagues and, of course, the exodus of half of their workforce, of almost all their workforce? You think you're going to find that? You think the Egyptians went right after that and said, let's record this ceremonious event? Of course they didn't. So keep in mind that even in defeat, these people, of course, produced these propaganda-type articles, and then in many cases, you're just not going to see anything recorded at all, especially in Egypt. So just because they don't find it doesn't mean, again, it never happened. That's the key thing. This is the record, of course, in Isaiah chapter 37. The angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000. 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And when the people arose early in the morning, beheld these were all dead bodies. Then Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed, returned home, and lived at Nineveh. And look at this. And as he worshipped in the house of Nisroch, his god, his two sons struck him down with the sword, and after they escaped the land of Arab. God always gets his vengeance. Remember what Sennacherib did. Of course, he insulted the gods of Hezekiah, and on and on. So, on the side of the old city of David, this is where the palace of David would have been. They have found multiple things that date back, including this particular signet ring, which is inscription in ancient Hebrew, again, that basically dates from the first Temple Mount. What's interesting also, and again, there's so much more that can be said about some of the characters that we read about in the Old Testament, like Belshazzar. Who was Belshazzar? Belshazzar was a historical character, and he's mentioned in Daniel chapter 5. He's mentioned as a ruler. Historians for a long time said, oh, that's a mistake, because Belshazzar was not ruler. And historians scoffed at the Bible for listing him as the last king of Babylon. But what did they find? Well, they find an inscription that indicates that of course, Nabonidus was actually the true last king of Babylon. But in the mid-1800s, they find these tablets that listed Belshazzar as the son of Nabonidus and was co-ruler of Babylon. Isn't that fascinating? So was he the true ruler or king of Babylon? Oh, his dad was. But dad put Goofy's son Belshazzar as king, as co-regent. And of course, you know what happens to Belshazzar with the handwriting on the wall. So it says this inscription says, "May it be that I, Nabonidus, king of Babylon, never fail you, and may my firstborn Belshazzar worship with all his heart." Folks, I will tell you, time and time again, you see little facts like this, little names mentioned, that again become historical fact once that their names are discovered in these findings. Belshazzar, again mentioned again. Shalmaneser was enthroned in Assyria, 859. Again, this was a stele that was found with his name on it. The inscription from Shalmaneser, biblical king of Assyria. I'm going to go through quickly. The Black Obelisk, probably one of the most important biblical finds in history. Why is this so important? This is the Black Obelisk, as you see here, was found in Kala, which is one of the Assyrian capitals. It mentions the victorious campaigns of Shalmaneser. But what's interesting is that it portrays in image form of a king of Judah. So in this picture, this is on the Black Obelisk, it's a picture of King Jehu paying tribute, bowing down to Shalmaneser III. It shows on picture, and it says Jehu, son of Omri. It also mentions his gifts of gold. Isn't that awesome? Now, what's interesting here is that if you know your Bible, you know, was Jehu the son of Omri? No, he wasn't the son of Omri. That was the family name, of course. In many cases, the Assyrians associated kings with their prior rulers and the family namesakes. But the Black Obelisk was erected as a public monument in Assyria in 825 BC. And again, you can see here King Jehu referred to the son of Omri. Jehu, of course, was not a descendant of Omri, but was the one who exterminated Omri's line later on. After Jehu, his son Jehoahaz ruled. Assyrian power, again, Tilgath-Pileser mentioned in tablet form. You see Tilgath-Pileser also Pul mentioned in inscription form. This was a biblical king. Time and time again, you see these names, these details that are showing up in these findings here. Again, this is another Assyrian palace relief. Ezekiel chapter 21 set up battering rams to call. This is interesting. I want to show you this real quickly. This is an Assyrian relief that shows their battering rams. And it shows how the army defeated many of the nations. This thing goes up and high. So you can see here also what they did to their enemies. They impaled their enemies. So when they went and conquered a city, they would knock their walls down. And you can see in the very background, you can see the enemies being impaled or on spiked poles. Sargon II. By the way, this picture from the Chicago Oriental Institute. Have you ever been to the Oriental Institute? If you've never been to the Oriental Institute in Chicago, it has some of the best Assyrian finds, and in fact, including Taylor's Prism. One of the Sennacherib prisms is there as well. Sargon II inscription. This is Lachish. This is a picture that I took myself last year. I want to show you one thing, and then I think we probably need to close it down. You can still see the ramp that was created by Sennacherib when he took the city. This was a fortified city. And when you go to the city of Lachish today, you see this right here? This is a man-made ramp that goes all the way across this road. And that's how Sennacherib went into the city. How did he do it? He pushed up those battering rams, knocked down the walls, went in and took the city. I've got to show you a couple of things before I finish. This is Taylor's prison, I mentioned that. A couple of very important things. The Mesha Stela. Mesha Stela, a very important finding that mentions several kings, including mentions the hearth of David, actually mentions the name of David in the Mesha Stela. This is probably one of the most profound finds in the last couple of decades. This is the Dan Stela. This was found in the city of Dan. This actually mentions, it's the first clear mentioning of King David in a secular source. It actually mentions the house of David. This is in the city of Dan as well. They have found where, of course, the king, so of course after the kingdom was split, you have Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Rehoboam goes up north. Rehoboam forms basically calf worship up in the north. This is actually where they worship. So they have excavated where Jeroboam set up one of the high places. He set up a high place in Dan. He set up another high place in Bethel. So this is one of the places. So again, clearly excavated. I tell you what, I'm going to stop there. I have a lot more, but I'm going to stop there, and because I want to get some feedback from you, maybe get some questions. And so I know I told you I was going to run through fairly quickly, but so I hope you're not tired or tired of listening. But let's hope we can get some good questions. And Brother Wayne, if you want to come and moderate, or you. Okay, I'll just take any questions, and if you have a question, I may want to pull up a picture. But thank you so much for your attention. I know you just ate, and I know this is a lot of stuff, but I'm hoping that maybe some of you have some questions that would be helpful to you. Who has the first question? And while you're, yes, ma'am, in the back.
As you were saying, some of those spectacular things catch our eyes, and maybe they're not true. You mentioned the wheels.
Yes, ma'am.
The wheels of the Red Sea. So you think that is not the case?
I believe that. Right. Yeah. So what you're referring to is Ron Wyatt he published a finding where he basically allegedly went into a part of the Red Sea that he thought would have been the most likely place that they would have crossed. And I will tell you, I've read every single bit of that because I'm totally attracted to that stuff. None of what he published has held up in any level of scholarship, not even among really conservative biblical archaeologists. Most people in archaeology and scholarship refer to those findings as being spurious. And I hate to say that, but again, now, do I put it past the fact that they may someday find a wheel? And by the way, what she's referring to is they went into the Red Sea, and there's been some recent pictures that are more recent than Ron Wyatt's, where they've actually gone in with robot cameras, and they have found petrified wheels that have become basically part of the bottom of the sea floor. And they've identified them as chariot wheels. The problem is that knowing where they crossed is impossible. And it's literally like finding a needle in a haystack. And so it's very, very difficult to correlate that to the Exodus. Yes, ma'am, you have another question.
And also recently, I had read an account of lead anchors at the right fathoms, etc., to be the anchors that were cut when the Apostle Paul's ship wrecked. Have you read that?
Okay, now those things are much more likely because we know exactly where Paul was shipwrecked. And we, like for instance, my wife and I were on the island of Rhodes. And they know the bays very likely that Paul came into. They know the specific islands because they're mentioned by Luke. Those, I have no doubt, are probably authentic to the era. Now, to say that that's Paul's is a reach. But to say that they're first century, no doubt. Let me give you another example. One of the big attractions around the Sea of Galilee right now is what's called the Jesus boat. You heard of the Jesus boat? It shouldn't be called the Jesus boat because it's just a boat that they found when the Sea of Galilee began to become very low during the summer. They found this boat, and it is a boat from the first century, and it is a classic boat that would have been used during the time of Jesus' ministry. So you can literally go and look at this boat, and that's very likely the type of boat that Jesus... But again, when you're in Israel, everybody wants to make a dollar. Everybody's going to say, well, this is Jesus' boat. This is the same boat Jesus was on. This is where Jesus fell. This is where he wept. Those things are difficult to say, but those are great examples. Thank you so much for mentioning those. Those are good examples. Another question. Thought. Surely someone has a question. Yes, sir.
My question is personal.
Yes, sir.
What challenges have you faced that have motivated you to become interested in this particular subject?
Okay, the question is what's motivated me? I went to a secular university, probably one of the most secular universities in Texas, and I was challenged as a student, and I've recounted this to my children many times, and that I did not have apologetics classes when I was in high school, and I did not have any of this stuff when I was in high school, and I went and I was thankfully a part of a great congregation, and I was part of a group of people that I was able to go to and say, hey, listen, point me in the right direction. But I was challenged from an evolution standpoint because I was a biology major. I was challenged in the literature classes that basically just mocked the New Testament as being inauthentic and all those things. And so from early on, I was just really attracted to apologetics because I was really just wanting to, I knew those things to be true, I just didn't have evidence of them. But as I dug and as I looked, I sought out those things. Apologetics Press, back when I was younger, Apologetics Press still exists today. And there's lots of other great sources of information. And if you want sources of good, solid information, I'll be happy to help you. There's a good number of websites that I think are good. Anything you read online, you have to read with a great amount of attention to detail. You can't swallow every single thing you read. But you know what? I tell you what. I think that being someone that has been trained in the sciences, I truly believe that our faith should be rested upon evidences, and I think that if we seek them out, and if we use our logic and rationale, I think we can come to the correct conclusions. But thank you for asking that. All right, surely someone has some more questions. If not, I want someone to hopefully think of a question, but while you're thinking of a question, I'm going to show you one thing that I think is very interesting, and that's one of the newer finds. And I'll start here. And please, if anybody has any questions, I know we just have a few more minutes.
Hey, John.
Yes, sir.
Be fair when you go over there now.
Okay, that's a good question. Mickey's asking, is there concern for, should you be concerned about going to Israel? I travel a lot, Mickey. You know, I'm in Chicago, LA. I sometimes, in fact, I was in Brooklyn with my daughter Audrey. I felt a whole lot safer in Israel than I did in any of those places. There's a whole lot more people shot in Chicago than in Israel. Now, so the interesting thing is that the media feeds upon anything that happens in that very volatile little country. Keep in mind, Israel, as a country, from Dan to Beersheba, is about the size of the state of New Jersey. It's a tiny little country. And I don't want to use this as a platform for any advertisement, but I am going to Israel in May of 2017, and we've been a couple times. We've taken groups. We have a whole group program, and I think it's one of the best things you could do. One of the best investments of your time and money is to go and see these places for yourself. Now, here's the thing. I want to make it clear. Do you have to go for you to have a solid faith? Absolutely not. You can have a solid faith rested upon solid evidences without ever stepping foot in Israel. But I think it's a great opportunity. And I think that, Mickey, you've been there. You were there for just a short period of time, but I feel very safe there. The security there in the airport and around the area is way beyond ours. They make our TSA look like kindergarten cops, if that tells you anything. Yes, sir.
I'm just curious, instead of just Googling some of the information you've given us,
give a website where we can go and get some of the information that does bear out Bible truth, rather than coming across pseudo archaeology?
Boy, that's a great question. And first of all of what you just saw, and by the way, I think I made it about halfway through these presentations. They're all yours. I'm going to make them available to you. In fact, I'll just slide them onto your desktop. And then Brother Galloway, I'm sure, can maybe make those available to you. They're big files with lots of pictures, so they can't just be zipped. But is it?
I think we can put them on our website.
Perfect. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is that as for a website that for the most part has biblical truths and a lot of good information, I can't say that 100% of it I agree with, but I would say 99.9% is Apologetics Press. You have any problems with me mentioning that site? Apologeticspress.com or .org is I think, a very good site. It not only mentions archaeology, but it gets into evolution, existence of God, all those types of things, a lot of great articles. So that's a site that I would say is a good site to go to. Now, when you start going to places like Biblical Archaeological Review, I don't know, have anybody ever heard of BAR? Biblical Archaeological Review? I swallow my tongue every time I go in it. They'll have one article that basically will attest to biblical truth, and the next one they'll question the authenticity of something that's just absurd. So almost everything that you'll read, you just have to read with a lot of skepticism. But everything I have here, you can have, and at least you can know that this is, this is good. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Yes. There is a website. It's BiblelandPassages.com. BiblelandPassages.com. There are videos on there that will give you an overview of a particular site, including the archaeology. And you mentioned that as a project, and I thank you for that. That's a project that I spent a lot of time on. But BiblelandPassages.com or .org, Bibleland Passages, all one word. There you'll see videos, and if you just click on the videos, it'll give you a great overview of Jerusalem. I do sections. I have a section on Jericho, so if you want to see a very detailed version of Jericho, where I'm on site and talking about things, I do Mount Gilboa, we do Mount Nebo. But the thing is that every few months there's going to be a new video released, and so keep your eye on that one. That's a very good site as well. Yes, ma'am. No, I'm glad you're asking questions. Go ahead.
Have you been back under the Temple Mount? Are there not passages under it? Is that impressive?
It is incredibly impressive. So the question was, can you go under the Temple Mount? I have been able to go on the Temple Mount, which is Muslim controlled. Of course, on the Temple Mount, remember who built that Temple Mount? It's the size of it's like the size of 6 football fields. The current modern Temple Mount was built by Herod. And of course, the temple that was built by Herod was destroyed. And in its place is the Dome of the Rock, which is a Muslim holy site. And that's probably right about where the temple was. But underneath the Temple Mount, there are what are called Western Wall passages, and you can literally go down and walk under the Temple Mount where you're at the level of the first century ground. And you can go through sections and actually put your hand on Mount Moriah, which is awesome. By the way, where did God tell David and Solomon to build the temple? Where did they build the temple? Mount Moriah. What also happened at Mount Moriah? Yeah, that's where Abraham offered Isaac a sacrifice. Amazing things took place on that mountain, on that hill, and you can see that. Of course, it's a large mountain, outcropping that rises up above. And what Herod did is he extended it significantly with fill, and that's what's a lot of controversy right now is that the Muslims that are on top of that dominate the top of the Temple Mount they have basically dug into the fill and have basically, kind of thrown the fill out. And there is a project right now where they're going through the fill that they illegally removed, and they're finding artifacts in the fill that they removed from the Temple Mount. Yes, sir.
I have a personal interest and done a lot of research in the Noah and the flood. Is there any credible thing that's ever been done? You hear a lot of writing, I've read a lot of things. I don't know enough about it to know if it's credible about where the ark might be located and in Turkey. And is there any
Right.
credible information about that? Is that mostly people who are one of those pseudo things that you talk about?
Okay. The question was, is there any really credible information on where the Ark of Noah is? And I would answer that question by saying that most would say there is no credible information as to where that is right now. There have been satellite images that have caught what appears to be the shape of a boat. There have been people who have claimed to remove pieces of the wood and there's been carbon dating on some of the pieces of the wood that people have claimed. None of it has stuck. None of it has been verified, solidified, and that is such a dicey area right now because it's right on the border. Mount Ararat, by the way, if you're just geographically, it sits on the border of Turkey and Iraq. It is not a good place to go climbing. And so it's very hard to get to. And there have been men who've gone up there and looked. In fact, there's been, I think I've read a lot too. And believe me, I'm looking for something credible. I have not found it yet. But that's a great question. I wish that were the case. I wish that were the case. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the Shroud of Turin.
Yes.
What's your...
I believe the Shroud of Turin to be fraudulent. I don't believe that to be authentic at all, and I believe that it has borne out that way from most scholars. So I do not believe that to be authentic. When you look into the details of it and look at some of the claims, it just doesn't hold up. So I do not believe that to be authentic. The Shroud of Turin was something that was found in the city of Turin, which is actually in Italy, that was said to have been the shroud that was placed over the body of Jesus because it portrays an image, and it's very hard what I think what they determined is that the material may date to a first century date, but of course that being the shroud of Jesus is very much so challenging to believe.
What about James' ossuary box?
Yes, the ossuary. Yes, I've got a picture of that, and let me show you a picture of that while we're talking about, just so you can see that. So this is actually the inscription on this ossuary. Ossuary was a bone box, and you'll find these throughout. In fact, you can literally be walking in Jerusalem and see a cave with a bunch of ossuaries in there. But ossuaries were bone boxes. What happened was the body would be placed in the tomb. They would go back in about a year and take the bones. And these boxes were about 22 inches long. Why were they 22 inches? Because that's the length, that's the average length of the femur. That's the longest bone in the body. So they would put the bones in there. So what they have found is they found this bone box that has this inscription. It says, Yaakov bar Yosef Akiyud di Yahshua. And what that says is basically basically the brother of Jesus. And let me see if there's another picture here. There's also the ossuary of Caiaphas as well. But basically this box is called James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. There is a lot of debate. And I have fallen on both sides of it because there's good evidence that it's authentic. It's written in Aramaic, by the way. That's Aramaic. Still being debated. There is good evidence that it is authentic. There is also questionable evidence that may support the fact that it's a forgery. Now, what has been deemed to be authentic without much question is the ossuary of Caiaphas. And this is the ossuary of Caiaphas. Who was Caiaphas? Caiaphas was the high priest that presided over the Sanhedrin. Caiaphas was basically the son-in-law of Annas. So remember that when Jesus was on trial, Jesus, of course, is first taken who? Taken to the house of Annas. Annas was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who among the Jews was still considered the leader of or the president of the synagogue, the leader of the Sanhedrin. So then he's taken to the house of Caiaphas. Now the house of Caiaphas is a place that I believe to be authentic. Where the house of Caiaphas is, they have built a church that has provenance that dates back to the 4th century. It's called the Church of Gallicantu. Does anybody know what the Church of Gallicantu stands for? Or Gallicantu? You remember that? Gallicantu means, in essence, the cock's crow. This is the place, of course, where did Peter deny Jesus? In the courtyard of Caiaphas. So they built this church at the site where Jesus was arrested and went before Caiaphas. And there are 1st century findings all around that site that I believe are authentic. But you can literally stand and look at the place where likely Peter denied Jesus thrice. So that's the Church of Gallicantu. So after he goes to the house of Caiaphas, where does he go to next? Then he's taken from there to the house of hewn stone, which is on the Temple Mount. That's where the Sanhedrin met. And remember that the Jews could not kill Jesus without the authority of the Romans. So where do they go next? Well, they go to Pilate. So here's the question, and I know we're coming to the end, and I know we're getting tired. Where was Jesus taken before Pilate? Almost everybody forever has thought that he was taken to the fortress of Antonia, which was a fortress that was built by Herod and named after his buddy. I know who he was? Mark Antony. I remember that guy, and I'm not talking about the Latin singer. I'm talking about actually, Mark Antony. He builds this fortress that was attached to the Temple Mount. Well, that's not where Jesus was taken to see Pilate. Jesus was taken to see Pilate in the palace of Herod. And I have pictures where they've excavated, and they believe that to be the place of the Praetorium. Remember the New Testament says that he was taken to the Praetorium? Well, that Praetorium is in the palace of Herod. So he was taken to Herod. Well, he was taken to see Pilate. And remember, Pilate sends him where? Finds out he's from Galilee. Where does he send him? Sends him to Herod, who's right there in the same compound. And then, of course, Herod sends him back to Caiaphas. Sends him back to Pilate. Pilate, of course, condemns him, and then he's taken to Golgotha. So, lots of little archaeology right there. You folks, you come to Israel, you can walk steps and walk these places where Jesus walked, and I tell you, it's powerful to consider what he went through and the distance that he walked through after staying up all night in the Garden of Gethsemane. Remember that the Bible says that he sweat drops of blood because of the agony of knowing what was ahead. Powerful, powerful message. And let me just say this as we close. If you aren't a Christian, and if you are interested in a Bible study, or just to learn any more about the Bible, if you want to learn more about the Bible, I know that I know Wayne, I know there's lots of people here that would love to study with you, to just learn more about who Jesus is and about those things. And I will tell you what, I am so honored that you came, that you lasted this long. And I can't wait to meet you and see you again. And I thank you so much, Brother Wayne Galloway, for your hospitality. And this has been great. God bless you all. Thank you so much.